Hello and welcome to this episode of the SchoolVibe podcast. My name is Daryl Loy. I'm your host. I am the founder and creator of the Modern Learning Collaborative, an organization here to help independent schools primarily with their understanding and implementation of modern learning tools, techniques, and environments to make sure that we prepare students for the success in the modern world. And so that's what we do at the Modern Learning Collaborative. If you would like some more information on the Modern Learning Collaborative, visit my website, darylloy.com. Click on Modern Learning Collaborative or darylloy.com/Modern Learning Collaborative. And there you will find a plethora of information about me and about what we do with Modern Learning Collaborative, why we do it. And you can also sign up there for a masterclass that I'm calling Casting a Vision for Modern Learning. So it's really a 45-minute discussion about why it's important. It just can certainly blow your mind. I hear some odd buzzing. I apologize if that's coming across on the podcast. I will double check that for sure. But the Casting a Vision for Modern Learning masterclass will in fact help frame, if you will, the importance of sort of, as I always talk about, the transformation rather than reformation or reform that's needed in education. So the Casting a Vision for Modern Learning will, in fact, lay that framework out for you and why that's important. And this buzzing is going to drive me nuts. So I am live on YouTube. If you're listening to me audio only, feel free to mosey on over. There'll be a link in the show notes with the SchoolVibe podcast channel on YouTube. Go on over there and check out any of the previous episodes for sure. And also, you can then subscribe to the channel, which I would appreciate very, very much if you would do that. Subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification icon so that when I go live each Wednesday at 4 p.m. Central Time, you'll get a notification of that, and then you can join me here live as I record. And I, again, do record this, so I do release it as audio only. So welcome. That's a little bit about me, about what I do, who I am. 20 plus years, 21 years in private school education, in and around the whole idea of education technology, that I have then, over the last number of years in independent schools, have morphed that into the idea of modern learning. So I changed the name of the technology department for in the last two schools I was a part of, from the technology department to the Department of Modern Learning. Changed my title from Director of Technology to Director of Modern Learning. And basically what that means is that it is less about the technology and more about the learning. I'm convinced we need to de-emphasize the technology and re-emphasize the learning. That's what we do. That's why we're there at school. I'm not there. My singular and sole focus is not to make sure all the boxes and wires have all the proper lights on them. That is very much a rudimentary and fundamental level of what the Department of Modern Learning does. Because without that base foundational stack, if you will, nothing above that will happen. So it is very important that those pieces exist and function correctly. So as a part of the work I do, I am in the midst of doing actually a technology audit for a new head of school who's came in and kind of struggling with his understanding of what his institution has in the way of network and in way of everything that supports that digital integration and modern learning platforms. So I'm helping with that. Having a good time with that. And I'm certainly open to doing that kind of work as well. Again, that is the foundational aspect of the entire modern learning initiative that I have implemented at the last two schools I was part of. So today I have one article and one only, and that is because it's a doozy. It is a doozy indeed. And I'm still looking at the source of my buzzing, and I don't know. That did not fix it. So again, my sincere apologies if you are hearing any of that. It's a bit irritating. So I'm going to try to ignore that and continue with the podcast. So yes, this one article, oh my goodness, it's a doozy. But I want to talk briefly about where where I learned about this article. In the last 2 episodes show notes, I believe I listed a AI meetup that was being hosted by Atlas, the Association of Tech Leaders in Independent Schools, and that actually happened this afternoon. So I sat in on that, and it was there that Dr. Ashley Cross, who works for Atlas, shared this particular article, and I had not seen it before. She was asking sort of for some, I guess, reaction to this article, and unfortunately I had not read it before. The article came out on the 12th of this month, just a mere 8 days ago, so I had not had an opportunity to read it. I have since devoured it. It's not a long read, but I sat down just because of the reaction that I had towards it, and we'll get into that. I'll jump into it here in a minute, and you'll see what I'm talking about. But there is a ton to unpack here. So let's go ahead and jump on in. So slide down here so that you can see this article. It's on the screen if you're watching. If you're audio only, let me read the title of the article. The title of the article is "The EdTech Revolution Has Failed. The Case Against Student Use of Computers, Tablets, and Smartphones in the Classroom." Now, if you can't imagine, this article did not sit well with me, just from the title alone. And I don't know the author, Jared Conley Horvath, maybe. He is apparently, I believe I read in here that he's a neuroscientist. That's wonderful. But the real, I guess, disappointment with the article was right off the bat that the introduction was written by John Haidt and Zachary Roush. And I don't know Zach, but I do know John Haidt, or I don't know him, but I know his book, The Anxious Generation, which I read this summer. And I believe I wrote a blog post you can read on my website, darylloyd.com. I think it's /blog. I think we'll get you there, in which I sort of reviewed the book. And that's really part of my disdain for this article, because I have a significant disdain for that book. I think if I had to sum it up, I really feel as though there's a lot of fear-mongering in the book. I think the author, Jonathan Haidt, just really went out of his way to strike fear in the hearts of parents everywhere that technology is ruining their kids' lives. And that's one aspect of it. And the other aspect is that we need to roll the clock back 30 years to before all this stuff existed. And that simply isn't going to happen. Can't happen. Shouldn't happen. And that's just really, it's just a very frustrating book and very frustrating topic for me. Do I disagree with everything? Pretty much. Cell phones are a distraction. We'll get into that because, as you might imagine, if they're writing the introduction, that the article very much follows a lot of the logic of the book. I don't doubt. I don't disregard. I don't argue that cell phones in schools are a distraction. Absolutely, they are. I'm not suggesting and would never suggest that they are not. They are. My question is, why? Why are they distractions? Why are they distractions, and what do we do about it? Because managing those distractions, and I'm getting ahead of myself here and I apologize, but managing those distractions is a part of life. It's what we do, and we need to be prepared for that. And frankly, I think schools need to be in the middle of that. I think every kindergarten teacher on the planet spends the preponderance of their year helping those little kids learn how to deal with distractions. The distractions are everywhere when you're 5 years old and you're in a new environment and mom and dad aren't there and you've got all these new friends and all these new gadgets. And what are these letters and numbers all about? And how do we, now we've got pencils to write with instead of just crayons or markers. And we've got a whiteboard we can draw on. And the distractions abound in a kindergarten classroom. And so the teachers spend the preponderance of their day helping kids navigate those distractions. Well, we've never done that with cell phones. We've never done that with social media for our students. We've never, at any school I've been a part of, any school I've ever seen, any publication I've ever read, we've never done that. We've never helped kids with those kinds of distractions and helping them understand how to navigate those. So I'm not disregarding the distraction factor. It's real, no question. But what do we do about it? And banning cell phones is not the answer. It is not. That is, as they say, dealing with the symptom and not with the root cause. Banning is ineffective. Banning also goes a long way in the brains of the students to help them become even more reassured that school is completely disconnected from the real world. If you think for a moment that you can ban cell phones in the real world, you are disillusioned. You are wrong. However you want to say that. Trying not to be terribly harsh. You can't. These devices, which I kind of thought maybe was part of the reason I was getting some feedback here. It's not, because I moved it and it's still happening. These devices are a critical part of every adult's life. Almost every aspect of our day is managed, or at least mine is, and I know I'm not alone, but it's managed by this device. It knows what time it is. It knows what the weather is. It knows where I'm supposed to be. And so we're not going to get rid of that. Not only are we not going to get rid of that, but we need to be preparing students to live in that world and succeed in that world and be, as I say, prepared for the realities of and success in the modern world. Dr. Jordan Spear, I go back to him almost every episode in his book, The New Childhood. The purpose of school is to prepare kids, to give them the ability to express themselves using the tools that currently shape their world. That's true today. It was true yesterday. It was true 100 years ago. It was true even longer than that. When just simply learning to read and write were the tools that were shaping our world, that's what we taught in school. When calculators became a thing, we taught that in school. we expected kids to bring a TI 88 or whatever the number is calculator to class every day and know how to use it and prepare them with how to use that in the context of whatever class it was, math, algebra, whatever. That's what school does. Why treat these devices any differently? I think it's wrong. So let's jump into the article, because right off the bat, I'm not kidding you, in the introduction by John Haidt, there is the major underlying assumption that this entire article, and I would say, in fact, the entire book, The Anxious Generation, is written on. The entire underlying assumption of this article is just wrong. So let me just read a little bit. Basically, this first introduction is the reason they're suggesting that EdTech has failed is because it has not delivered the academic benefits once promised. Well, here's the deal, buddy. I can tell you, at least from our one-to-one program at Fort Worth Academy that we launched in 2007, we never once suggested that we were going to deliver any sort of academic benefits. I know what you're thinking. I know what you're thinking. Well, then why do it? Well, here's the deal. Our kids at Fort Worth Academy in 2007 had tremendous test scores. We don't do standardized tests in independent schools, but we do assessments to help us understand how well our students perform compared to other students around the country. And our students performed well. We did not implement our one-to-one program to improve their academic performance. We did not do that. And I suggest most schools, independent schools, who implemented one-to-one programs did not do them to improve scores. Our kids are very smart. Our kids performed well in relation to all the other kids across the country, and we have the test scores to prove it. We did not implement our one-to-one to improve academics. And we were very adamant about that point to our constituents. As I've said in the past, we had a 2-year run-up to the launch of our one-to-one program. And over those 2 years, we spent a great deal of time explaining why we were doing this and also why we were not doing this. And we made it very clear, and our parents already knew that. Our parents already knew that their kids are smart, that their kids perform well, and implementing a one-to-one program for us had nothing to do with the academic benefits. What it did have to do with is the fact that this is the real world. This is the world they live in. And that aspect has done nothing but improve significantly. It is even more of the world they live in today. When we rolled these out, there was no iPhone. That didn't exist. Social media didn't exist. But we knew intrinsically and inherently that these devices were going to be central to the work that they would do in both higher education, if they chose that route, and in the real world. We knew that, and we knew it was our responsibility to help prepare kids. And that's, the start of my mantra about preparing kids for the realities of and success in the modern world. And that's where all that started. That's why we did a one-to-one program, not to improve academics. So again, as I said here, let me read on here for just a second. It went on to talk about the fact that that there were no that it didn't deliver on the academic benefits promised. Meanwhile, global test scores in math, science, and reading have plummeted, as you can see in Figure 1 below. You can see that when you reference the article. I should have included that in the slide. My apologies. These trends were exacerbated by COVID-19 pandemic, no doubt. But they go on to say they began in the early 2010s, just as digital devices were being placed on the student's desk. This, as in much of the information in Jonathan Haidt's book, is, in my opinion, nothing more than fear-mongering. Because there's no evidence here. There's no causal evidence. There is no actual evidence of a causal relationship between these devices and test scores. I'm not arguing the data of the test scores. Not going to do that. But you just can't throw around the cause for this, as I say in my comments here. You just can't throw that around willy-nilly. There is no evidence presented in this article, and there's no evidence presented in the Anxious Generation book that there's no causal evidence presented in either of these. None. Zero. Not a bit. I'm not arguing that the test scores didn't go down. I'm just simply saying there's no evidence to blame that on the devices just because it happened in 2010. In fact, I've got an alternate theory. Let me throw this out here. It's not even in my notes. I've got an alternate theory. And it is just a theory. It's just a theory. I also have a blog on my website that includes a quote from a young lady talking about, and this quote went into the yearbook of her school. And she is bemoaning the fact that let me just, I'm going to dork it up if I try to do this from memory. I want to read to you her quote directly that was included in her yearbook, which I thought was very interesting. And this is her quote. Let me open this article. There we go. And this literally was in her yearbook. Her quote for the yearbook: "This school collects quotes, one from each graduating student, to feature in their yearbook on the page with their picture." And her quote is this: "Isn't it funny how we're trusted with the future, but not with our phones until it's lunchtime?" Incredibly astute for this young lady. So here's my alternate theory. Yes, it's just a theory. I don't have statistical evidence that these guys are touting in this article. But here's my theory. As I said, the banning of cell phones is an indicator to kids that the school is completely disconnected from reality. Could it be that when we placed these digital devices in front of students and they realized things like knowledge is no longer synonymous with power, because knowledge exists on this little screen with this little keyboard in front of me, and anything I want to know, I can find. And that's another disconnect between schools in the real world. Schools think, particularly at 2010, when these devices began to be more prevalent, we did ours in 2007, could it be that students just began to realize the ineffectiveness of school based on now they have access to so much of the real world and so much knowledge that doesn't come from the teacher who's standing in front of the classroom imparting this knowledge? So could it be that the overall change in scores is because students realized it's not going to do anything for me? Making these grades will not directly facilitate my success in the future, but understanding this device and the impact it has on my future might. So my alternate theory is that maybe just the motivation of the students shifted as these devices were introduced into the classroom, because their vision of the world and the way the world worked changed drastically because we opened that up to them. And rather than, just like we're doing with cell phones, rather than helping them learn to use these tools properly, we didn't do that. And left to their own devices, no pun intended, that's another theory for the outcome here. I totally believe that. Okay, so as in the anxious generation, they advocated phone-free schools. So let me read here for a second. We made the case that locking up phones from bell to bell, which don't get me started on the whole bell thing. Oh my goodness. Is that real world? Are bells real world? Do they ring a bell in the office building to tell you it's time to stop reading your email and it's time now to go to the copy machine and start making copies? They ring a bell and tell you it's time to go to lunch? No, they don't. That's not real world. Don't get me started on that. Come to my Casting a Vision for Modern Learning. You'll hear everything you need to know about that. So from bell to bell would improve performance and focus and the quality of students' in-person relationship. And they say, in parentheses, that seems to be happening at light speed and with very positive results. My question is, at what cost? It's happening because there's no alternative. There's no alternative given. You're taking these devices away. What do you expect to happen? So, my real question is, at what cost? Of course, if you remove the distraction, focus is going to shift. I mean, that's a no-brainer, right? But what are they losing as a result? Again, my position is we should be teaching them how to function in a distraction-heavy environment, because that's not going to go away. In fact, I suggest that it's probably going to get worse. So we're missing the mark. We're missing the mark as an educational industry. We're not educating kids. We're not preparing them for success in the realities of the modern world, because they need to know how to deal with these distractions. So coming on down, let's see. Again, they talk at length about learning outcomes, that EdTech has failed because there have been no improvements in learning outcome. I addressed that at the top. That's not why we did it. Not at all why we did it. Let's see. So they spend a lot of time talking about learning outcomes, and that there aren't any. But what they don't talk about is how these tools can broaden, in my opinion, the learning opportunities. And instantly they've got access to worlds that teachers in my day and students of my day had no insight into. I knew about the Great Pyramids of Giza. I knew about the Sphinx because I had a book and it had a picture of them. But that's all I knew. I knew where Egypt was. I could find it on a map. Now, with these tools and in very short order, I can understand so much more about the Egyptian world, the culture of the time, all of the speculations about when the Sphinx was created. So I don't have to rely on the information that's on a piece of paper that very likely could have been outdated the moment it was printed. So they don't, while they talk about no real improvement in learning outcomes, the access and the broader learning opportunities, they don't discuss that in the least in the article. And I think those are a very real aspect of any good one-to-one program. Let's see. Okay, what is the primary function of a computer when students sit down in front of a screen? What is the fundamental behavior that immediately jumps to mind? Well, I think what they're trying to get at here is that it's distractions, it's social media, it's anything but the learning that is going on. I say the immediate action that or behavior that jumps to mind is access to knowledge and information, and even more understanding that the school is less than relevant given its policies and procedures. So I'm going to go on. I'm going to look at a few more of my notes here. I'm checking the time. Let's see. They do get into the idea of multitasking. I totally agree that multitasking, people think that they are better at that than they really are. That is a difficult strategy to employ in the learning goals. I completely understand that. Not suggesting that that's a thing, but what the article is suggesting that the multitasking is the flipping from social media to watching a TV show to YouTube to creating digital content to somewhere in there spending some time learning about something. That's the kind of multitasking that they're talking about here. And all of that gets back to the fact that we've done nothing to help kids deal with the distraction factor, educate them that multitasking is overrated, and that nobody does that really well, even teachers. So again, the underlying principles or the underlying position of this article is that EdTech has failed because no appreciable academic outcome has happened. I've told you that doesn't apply. And that we've not done a good job preparing kids how to deal with the distractions. And that's, again, another underlying assumption on why to do away with these devices and why EdTech has failed, because The kids can't stay focused. Well, that's interesting because let's look at this, one of the last parts of this. Let me read this whole article. I'm sorry, this whole paragraph. To be fair, even before digital devices took over the classrooms, students struggled with the lack of attention, shallow thinking, overconfidence, and other learning problems. Wow. We are not even talking about a new issue. This is something that has been going on in schools by their own admission for a very long time. Remind me again why we're trying to blame the device on this. It happened before the devices came along. And it'll happen after these devices go away and the next iteration of things come along. Unless we do more to prepare students. So, got several more notes. I'm not going to continue to beat the proverbial dead horse, but I am obviously not a fan. I do believe that EdTech programs are beneficial. There are entire organizations devoted to education technology. There are schools who have gone even further in the adoption, and use of digital technologies that go even beyond just the learning aspect. Because a lot of what I do and what I recommend to schools and what I've built in schools previously use digital technologies as a way for students to demonstrate their knowledge of a particular topic. So, sure, a kid can write a book report, demonstrate their knowledge of that book. They could write a paper about photosynthesis, demonstrate their knowledge of that. But in today's world, they can also create a documentary video on photosynthesis, create a podcast on Abraham Lincoln's management of the Civil War during his presidency. They can use these tools to demonstrate their knowledge. Podcasts, as I said, video productions. They can create a website. Let's create an entire interactive website using these tools today to demonstrate their knowledge. Phenomenal. I've talked about the use of AI in schools as a way of engaging and in getting kids invested in storytelling. I talked about from the Chromebook Classroom podcast, John Sowash's recommendation of at Halloween, taking stories that kids have written describing a house or a factory or something that has spooky attributes, and they go into detail on this house or building or whatever, and then loading that into an AI image generator and see what it calculates or creates, rather, based on the kid's description. And fascinating. That is an English language exercise all rolled up in the use of digital technology and helping them better or improve their vocabulary by spending more time describing this house or this building. Their images improve. If that's not an English lesson, I'm not really sure what is. If the English class is all about writing a paper demonstrating the knowledge of a particular book, why not produce a podcast about that to demonstrate knowledge? So, all I'm saying is that I think the article, as well as the Anxious Generation book does nothing to improve the situation. In fact, they're suggesting that we roll the clock back and basically deploy the ostrich principle, where we just bury our heads in the sand and ignore the fact that these tools exist and that the kids would be better off just forgetting that they even exist. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I don't think it's fair to students. And I think what would happen is we would produce a boatload of kids who are ill prepared for the real world. And let me give you a practical example. As you know, I am an independent contractor, self-employed. I do a variety of consulting jobs and consulting work. One of the things that I'm working on right now with a client is, because I have a degree in accounting. I have a degree in accounting from Texas Tech University. When I started at my first nonprofit school, I ran all the accounting and finance for that school, as well as the technology. It was a director of operations role, and operations was a big hat that a lot of smaller hats sort of fit under, and accounting and finance was one of those. So I am in the midst of doing some consulting and some work for a client to help get their accounting functions in their nonprofit up to speed, get them caught up in the absence of the departure of some personnel. And then I'm also helping them by devising some policies and procedures, really documenting the whole accounting process, so that once I get this done and they rebuild their department, they've got a much better understanding of what needs to happen in the department on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. So now, let's say for a moment that I had no digital device experience. Let's say all of my accounting experience involved paper ledgers. I have a funny story about when I first started my very first accounting job in 1987 after graduating from Texas Tech. The first professional job that I took, that company had only had computer systems for about 2 years, which meant that some of the audits that were going on that went back further than 2 years, I physically had to drive to a warehouse and retrieve these gigantic, you can't see on the screen here, gigantic binders of ledger paper. Yeah, so I know what that is. And I'm old, so that's just part of it. But let's say that when this institution reached out to me to help with their accounting work, let's say all I knew were those ledgers. You know, I understand accounting. I know debits and credits. I know how to produce financial statements. I know what's important to be a part of that. But if I didn't understand computers and how accounting happens on digital devices, I would not last long with this institution. I would not last long at all, because it's 2024, and every aspect of every job and almost every management and administrative position is done on a computer. You cannot function in an office today without understanding how to use your digital devices. I would not have gotten this contract with this institution to help with their accounting work if I didn't know how it worked using a digital device. And none of that's going to change. None of it. So pulling these devices out of schools makes no sense. Just makes no sense. Okay, so I apologized. I wasn't going to beat that dead horse anymore, but I did just a little bit. Anyway, thank you for joining. I know it's one article today, so that's a little bit about the vibe going on in some schools. They're struggling with this, and they quote a couple of foreign countries that are pulling back on their digital devices, or at least they're reporting to do that. I have learned through my work with, let's just say, some of the three-letter agencies in the government that we can't always take everything we read on a website as gospel, as they say. So even though these countries are suggesting that they're pulling back from digital tools in these articles that these guys quote, I'm a bit skeptical, and I would need to see that for myself, because it's just not the way of the world. It just isn't. And barring some solar flare, EMP disaster that wipes out every piece of digital technology that we have, this is our world. This is a world that students need to be prepared for, and we will continue to do that in a very appropriate and mindful way. So, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of School Vibe Podcast. Please subscribe. Please rate the podcast. Would love to have you do that. As everyone says, that sure helps other educators find the podcast and enjoy the content. If you have things that you would like to discuss with me on the School Vibe Podcast, I am open to that at all. We haven't had ChatGPT on in a few episodes. I might get back to having them ChatGPT join me. I am talking to some colleagues about the possibility of coming and joining me for some conversations. So if you've got some things you'd like to discuss, that news that relates to schools, that impacts schools, man, I'd love to have you on and have that conversation. So reach out to me. I am at Darryl Loy, DARRYLLOY, on all the prevalent socials, and you can reach me at any of those places. My website is darrylloy.com. You can contact me through the website. Would love for you to find the YouTube channel if you're listening to me audio only, and subscribe to that and join me live. I do try to keep the chat open, so if anyone wants to pop in and share, we can sort of accommodate that. So again, thank you for listening. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. If and when you're listening to this remotely around the time I release it, which will be on a Thursday morning, or when I'm recording it live on a Wednesday evening, late afternoon, evening. Hope you have a great rest of your week. Hope you found this useful. And again, if there's more you would like to discuss, I am always open to that. So thanks for joining me. And until next time, we will talk to you then. Thanks so much.